Hi there and welcome to Sabbatical Brewing. You see our 3-tank system we have here at Sabbatical Brewing. Let me walk you through it really quick. We start off with our hot liquor tank, which is our first tank where the water starts. That's where we heat up the water. Then we go up into our mash tun, which is where the grain goes for all grain brewing. And we come out of that into our boil kettle. Down here is where we boil the beer, down to the wort that we come out and chill with our Counterflow Chiller. And then it goes into our fermenters and then finally into our keg. So this is a HERMS system. That's H-E-R-M-S. H is for heat, H-E, heat exchanger. There's a heat exchanger inside this tank. So what this is the inlet of the heat exchanger. This is the outlet of the heat exchanger. We heat our water up. We put it into this tank with the grain. HERMS is heat exchanger recirculating mash system. This is the mash. We come out, comes down, goes through the pump, through the heat exchanger, and then back in. So we constantly recirculate through the mash during the mash step, and we control the temperature by controlling the water that the heat exchanger sits in. This then becomes the sparge water for the end of the mash step. At the start of the process, we start with our reverse osmosis system because the start of the process is the water. We have water that goes through carbon filter, active carbon, and then softener, a water softener. Then after those two steps, we go through an RO system, which takes it through a sediment filter, then a reverse osmosis filter, and then also through another carbon filter, and then out. It fills up this 10-gallon tank. So when I'm ready to brew, I have 10 gallons ready to go. It makes 2.5 gallons an hour. And it preps the water so I have just RO water. Then when I need water, I start with my pails. And I start filling them up. This is water coming out of the 10-gallon storage tank. I fill these up, and then I pour them into the hot liquor tank. So with the reverse osmosis water, you have to add elements back into the water to make it be like the water of where the beer is being brewed for. So you can't just use pure reverse osmosis water. It's too pure. It doesn't have the chemicals to start the enzymatic reaction. So we have to add in gypsum, calcium chloride, and mag sulfate, and then there's a table based on if I want an IPA, I do one concentration. If I want a porter, I do a different concentration. Anyway, we add that, we measure that out, and then we add that to the water. We just put it in the kettle. So now to start our mash, we wait for the temperature of the water to reach our beginning mash temperature, which is the temperature we want to start the mash at plus about 10 degrees because it takes heat out to get the grains and everything started. So we open our valve. We prime our pump, and we turn this pump on. We get water going. It's flowing through the heat exchanger, out, and up into our mash tun. And then we pump until we put about 3 gallons of water here for every 10 pounds of grain. And so we're starting to fill now. We'll wait till we hit 3 gallons. So it looks like we've hit our level of how much water we need for the mash. So I'm going to come down, turn off the pump. Now that we have enough, I no longer need to make up the water. I now make this circuit, so it's going to recirculate. I go up. I take my grain that's already blended together and crushed, and I pour it into the pot, my mash pot, all the while stirring to make sure it's all wet and floating in the water. When all that is done, to keep the heat in, I replace the lid. And I go back and turn on the pump. So now we have mashed for an hour. All that does is takes all of our grain in here and it extracts the color and some of the flavors, but more importantly, it gets the sugar in an enzymatic reaction. It takes the sugar off the grains, and that's what's going to make our alcohol in the end. So we've waited an hour. We've been recirculating. Then we bump the temperature back on this tank here up to 170, 175 degrees. That knocks the sugar off the grains. So we ramp that temperature up. We recirculate a little bit, and then we get ready for the transfer step that we call the Sparge Step. Okay, our mash is done. We recirculated and heated our water up to 170 degrees. At this point, we no longer need the recirculating pump on that one going. We've stopped this pump, and we will move this so that our makeup water will now come in from this tank at that 170 degrees through all the piping up and then over the grains. That'll wash the sugars off. Then I'll take the outlet of the mash, I'll pass it through the screen, so if there's any grains that remain, it'll be caught in the screen and won't head out through the boil into the fermenters. And I'll take all of this water and pass it into the boil kettle. When we do this, we start very slowly. We want a quart a minute to flow through here. And we see that's about the flow rate I want. And now that will go down, and this is where we come and turn on the pump to put the hot water on top to knock all the sugars off with everything else down in the boil kettle. And we'll continue to do that until we put another 5 gallons of water across here. And that'll end up, after the retention and everything, it'll end up about 6 3/4 gallons in our boil kettle for the next step. So, our transfer is complete. All of our fluid has come off, our mash flowed down. We still have our wet grains up here, but all the fluid that's going to come off of them have come off. So we close that valve. Now we're in the boil kettle. We bring this up to a boil. It takes a few minutes, but once it's boiling, then we go and we have our pre-measured out hops. We add the hops into the container here, and we add the hops per the schedule for whatever beer is we are making. IPAs have a lot more hops. Some other beers have very few. Put the hops in, and we boil for an hour. During that hour, we'll drive off a gallon of water. This 6 3/4 gallons will go down to 5 3/4, if not 5 1/2. And then our boil step will be done. Near the end of the boil, we put in some other ingredients to help coagulate and bring all the solids together. But essentially, we got to boil for the hour, and then we come out. Here, and then I put on supply there, and return here. Counterflow. All right, we've connected our Counterflow Chiller. We have input water, which is cold from the city, and then it comes out here and it goes off to the yard. Then our beer comes in the top and goes out the bottom. So the beer and the water are going in opposite directions. That's why it makes it more efficient. Our boil is done, and we open this valve to let the hot wort come out of that tank, flow through this chiller, and into our fermenter. The whole time we kind of monitor the temperature. I've done this enough times. My monitor is my hand. I know what the top of this should feel like to hit 70 degrees, and I will throttle how fast it comes out of the boil kettle to make sure it doesn't get too warm. Then, after it's all transferred, and this tank is filled with, it should be about 5.5 gallons of wort, then at this point, the wort can't get enough air. So we take, and before this step, we've sanitized everything. This is sanitized. I put it in sanitizing solution, take it out, and I put this in and plug this in and aerate the wort to give it air while I go and I clean all of this. So about 20 to 30 minutes later, it's been aerating. I've cleaned everything. It's cooled off maybe a little bit more. I take this out. Then I go take my yeast, which is the final ingredient, which I've smacked. This package was swollen. I take scissors, I sanitize them, I cut this, and then I pour that into the fermenter and then put an airlock on it. And now we're ready for the fermentation process. And we've made wort. From this point, the yeast eat the sugar in the grain, in the wort, and they make the alcohol. And then about 2 weeks from now, we'll have beer.